Hello and welcome to Get Informed, America, the show that breaks through the mainstream media box to bring you real smart news. Hi, I'm Dave Oakenquist, and joining me is the smartest man I know, editor of Informed American and contributor to WallStreetWireNews.com, Mr. Rodney Johnson. Rodney, good morning.
Morning, Dave.
How are you, Rodney? I haven't talked to you since last week. How have things been with you?
Things are good. I'm ready for winter to show up here in South Texas. It's been hot and muggy, and I keep seeing that there is some cold weather up north, but not here yet. Maybe over the next week or so.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's late October, and if anybody's lives in the South, or certainly in your area, your neck of the woods there in Texas, and my neck of the woods here in Tampa Bay, yeah, we got 80s, and it really doesn't cool down for a few weeks.
But I did vote, and so I've got that out of the way. It took no time whatsoever. I walked in, walked up, showed my driver's license. They handed me my little ticket. I logged onto the little iPad thing, and 5 minutes later, I had cast my ballot and I was out the door. So that worked pretty well.
Well, good for you doing your civic duty. I also did mine. Mine was mail-in. So, we'll see.
You're taking a chance there, apparently, casting caution to the wind and all that.
Yeah. And I also, on the Florida ballot, you sign the outside of it. And right. I guess they do signature matching. And then they also, if the signature doesn't match, you can give them the opportunity to contact you. But you also do that by giving your phone number and email address. And that's right on top of the ballot. And I don't know, maybe I'm paranoid, but that felt a little weird to have to put my email address right on the outside there and my phone number where anybody could have it. What do you think of that?
Well, we're paying for convenience, and the convenience is being able to cast a ballot in an election without going anywhere.
Yeah.
And so the cost for that is, something. And first, it's time. You have to do it ahead of time. And second, it's getting through the parameters to make it safe. And then trying to give it a cure. And so all of these things are about one thing, you not having to go anywhere. And so now there are some people who can't, I get it, right? So let's disregard that for a moment and say you are an able-bodied person who could go to the polls. Yeah. You just chose not to.
Right.
And so I look at it and think, I don't really like those safeguards as a way to cure it, but I understand why they came up with it. And if you don't like it, you know what? Walk over to some early voting place, or God forbid, stand in line on election day.
Yeah, that's true. It didn't make me so uncomfortable so as to not.
There you go. You prioritized. Your phone number and email were not as important as not going anywhere.
That's exactly right. Yep. I do not want to be in there in a crowd having to vote. Not even because of COVID danger, just because I don't want to go out and interact with people and have to stand in line. But hey, that's me. Rodney, last night we had the second and final presidential debate. Of course, I carried that live with fellow Informed Americans on our Facebook page, and also I will have up a recap video on giving my thoughts on the debate. So I won't go into too much detail, but I want to know: did you catch the debate last night? Did you have any thoughts on that?
I did not watch 1 second of the debate last night. But there again, I never do. I catch the recap later, the points that they made, the demeanor and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I didn't see anything that was of note. It's the things we already knew. It's the positions that already staked out.
Yeah.
Trump seemed to do a better job of fleshing out what he's about. But that serves both purposes, right? People will say, well, President Trump was better at explaining his policies or what he's done with COVID and what he expects to do in the months and years ahead in a second term. Mm-hmm. But that also was Biden's chance to say, those are the things you don't want. So take from it what you want. I don't know that it changed any minds. As you and I were talking ahead of time, I know that 50 million people have already voted, including me and you. Yeah. And that's people who've actually cast the darn ballot. Another at least 50 million people have voted by mail because the mail service reports they've handled 100 million ballots. That includes both blank and completed. So if you assume a perfect 1-to-1 there, it's at least 50 million. Well, that's 100 million out of the expected 150 million people that are going to vote. And so 2/3 of us have already cast a ballot. Which is well beyond deciding, right? And so I struggle with how important these debates are so close to the election with information so easy to get now.
Yes, great points. I do want to just highlight my opinion on what you just said a second ago. I think Trump did a good job of two things. He drew a contrast, which he struggled to do. And one of the things I mentioned at the top was he needed to be focused. And I think the mute button actually helped him. It was like putting a kid in timeout for him to gather his thoughts. And he was more calm and sober, and didn't go off on tangents, which works well on the campaign trail when you have unlimited time. But for 2 minutes to get your thoughts out there can be very difficult. So it did serve him well for that. He drew a contrast as I'm the open the economy guy, and Biden's I'm willing to shut this thing down, with at the moment of bad news kind of thing. So I think that was helpful. And probably the biggest thing, and it seemed like a big thing at the time, and I haven't had time to go through all the news, all the punditry and all that, but the Biden's responses regarding fracking and the energy industry could be devastating for those undecideds in a place like Pennsylvania, Rodney.
Well, he said specifically that he is not going to ban fracking. He was pointed about that. But he also said that he wanted to end internal combustion engine sales starting in 2035, right? He wanted that to go to zero. Doesn't mean the cars won't be on the road. It means he doesn't want to do this. It's something that I have gotten into before in some other research. We're not looking at oil going away. It's just not going to happen. People talk about energy use in the United States. That's because it's where we live. We're not the growing market. The growth market for oil is overseas. And so the United States produced about 12.2 million barrels a day of oil last year. That was the highest amount produced by any country on the planet. We were the number one oil producer in 2019. We're expected to produce about 11.5 this year. This year, and maybe 11.1 next year. That's not a reduction that says this is falling off a cliff. And I would imagine that any administration, Biden or whomever, would find that doing that is a no-go, because that is very regressive. It pushes you into new technology that's expensive, and it falls on the people with lower income and lower assets the hardest. So it's very difficult to do.
Well, yes. Well, also, his fracking comments that he said, what he says now about fracking is in contrast to what he said during the primary.
Yep.
And yes, Rodney, it doesn't make any sense, but that does seem to be the plan regarding the oil and gas industry. Go ahead.
I push back because we all know that politicians say many things on the campaign trail that don't match what they do in office. Yeah. And on that mark, I'll tell you, President Trump has been one of the best at matching up what he said on the campaign trail with what he does in office. But most of what people say, they then come back and couch as aspirational after they get the office. Yeah. And so it's this game that we all play together, right? Where we understand that, this grand plan you talk about on the campaign trail isn't going to match what's going to happen once you get into office. True. And so the whole idea of this incredible change, I see it on the aspirational side. And I believe we're going to talk in a little while about, the new GM Hummer pickup truck. And that falls right in line with what we're talking about here. You can't tell me something like that's going to go mainstream and be available to everyone to suddenly drive an electric vehicle.
Yeah, exactly. I would just say, yes, I agree with your points, but it makes it all the more dumb for Biden to say something that is, it's not politically smart for him to do that. Even if there is, as you said, it would be very stupid to just, as we're the largest oil producer in the world, to just stop producing oil and selling it. That would be very dumb. And plus you have this gap period. So we all know, I think everybody in their mind kind of knows eventually we're going to get to that point, but why say that now? But hey,
there are many tens of millions of Americans who want that to happen, who are very interested in this happening. They're very worried about climate change. They're very worried about using a non-renewable energy source and all sorts of other things that smart people are going to talk about. And so when at least half the nation, and it is half the nation, is worried about this and wants to move that direction, it makes sense that a politician would be rowing that direction as well. And so I guess I don't take it as bad, because I'm seeing not only what he's talking about and looking at a base that wants this. And remember, I mean, Hillary Clinton lost in part because the Bernie bros said, we just can't stand her. And so there is a piece of the Democratic Party that is well to Biden's left, and he has to attract, which is what this is about. And then the other side of practically, it's a non-starter in the short term. It just is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my final word on an earlier point you made on potentially having 2/3 of the votes already cast. What you see is, and I've been looking at this and not trying to go too far down the rabbit hole. There are people who because the counties and states release the votes that they've received, not the results, but by party.
Right.
And what you see is a big lead for Democrats in mail-in, and then Republicans will tend to turn out on election day. So for that remaining, say, third of voters, I think there is an argument that it was crucial for President Trump to put on a good performance for those who, even if they're not undecided, maybe it'll give them enough of a enthusiasm to actually get them outside, which is something I struggle with, to go out and pull that lever or push that screen.
Maybe I again, maybe it's just me, right? I don't find them that helpful because I think they're more reaffirmation events for opinions people already had versus information that you're now going to use for a decision that's different from what you were thinking, the night before.
Yeah. All right, great. Rodney, the markets are waiting on stimulus, but we're still waiting on it. Everyone's still waiting on it. So we're not going to talk about it at all. Yeah. But elsewhere in the market, we saw the companies have been reporting earnings. And one of the interesting things that came out, Rodney, we got a story here from Wall Street Wire News. Is HBO a legit threat in the streaming industry? And in here mentions how Netflix looks like it may be faltering a little bit. Their subscriber growth may be peaking. And then here we've got AT&T posted strong third quarter results, which came in stronger than estimates, thanks in large part to subscriptions to its HBO Max service, which reached 38 million during the quarter, which I find to just be a very, very high number for what seems to be just a very expensive, I think it's about $15 add-on for some HBO content, maybe some partnership with Warner Brothers and stuff like that. Surprising number to me. Rodney, but back to Netflix, is this the beginning of the end for the streaming giant?
Well, it depends, right? If your view of Netflix is they only survive as long as they're growing their subscriber base, then eventually that's going to come to an end because they're going to reach, some point of falling or declining growth. It's not that they don't grow; it's that they grow at a much slower rate.
Right.
They grew so incredibly fast in the first and second quarter that I don't think anybody was surprised that they slowed down. Now they grew at a much slower rate than people had estimated, but still, right. Come on. They're off the charts in terms of what they've been able to do. They don't make money. They don't make a lot of money given their size and given their stock price. But they do have a lot of people. And so they've collected a lot of eyeballs. And people don't tend to move around all that much on these subscription services so far because they're low priced. And so I look at the HBO thing and I think, really, it's an added $15. The people who are dying in all this are the Comcast and Dish networks of the world, where people are cutting the cord and moving away. And so you just don't go back, right? You make a decision to no longer have cable. You set up all the things you're going to do to replicate it or get what you want. And I don't see you moving back from a streaming service, independent back to regular, what I think of as cable.
Right.
And so for you to say, hey, I have perhaps Disney and Netflix and I'll add on HBO, I think it's just a win-win. I think the pie gets a little bigger instead of one versus another. I don't know that people are leaving Netflix for HBO. I find that to be suspect.
Now I'm looking at Netflix subscribers in the United States, 73 million. And you assume this is, I'm making an assumption here, but I would assume this would roughly be one per household. Do you think that's a fair assessment? There probably are
actually a little less, right? And so I'm not fearful of saying it on a recording that goes out to people, but okay. I have Netflix subscription, and my kids who live in different places all use my Netflix subscription.
Oh,
right?
You can't do that.
And so we've had it for a very long time, and so they used it when they were home, and then they eventually went through college and moved along, and they haven't seen fit to get their own. And so there's about 120 million households in the United States.
Right, exactly.
And so to have 73 million Netflix accounts, I think you're reaching saturation here. So I'm not surprised at all that the US subscription base is growing quite slowly. And even the international, you have to develop content that attracts the international viewer. And the first thing you do is go to English speaking nations, because you can kind of repurpose content from the US, but then you have to reach further. And so it just gets harder to grow in terms of absolute numbers from here.
Right. So we think basically, in a round way, almost everyone who's going to have a Netflix subscription in the United States basically already has one.
Something along those lines, right? And so what you have to do is expand the number of households, but then you don't have to grow to make more money. All Netflix has to do is raise the price by 90 cents.
That's right.
90 cents. This is pretty good revenue, right? It just shows up right in, and they've raised the price on me however many times they've raised the price, and I've never noticed. I mean, it's gone from what, $8.99 to $13 or something.
Yeah. If you want to get the 4K, I think it's somewhere around $18, I believe, for the.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And so I that's their big stick that they wield, is that because they have so many accounts, they can raise the price ever so slightly, and it just falls right to the bottom line.
Yeah. So, all right. So Netflix can still survive, right? Many people like the content. They have a huge library of content. They're coming up with new stuff. Now they are losing The Office, which I believe at last check a couple of months ago was their most watched show. That's going over to Peacock. Right. And this is where it gets jumbled. I mean, because who's going to get that? And you get HBO Max. And I do think there's going to be a shakeout of this stuff. I don't imagine, because at that point I'll just get the cable and then I could watch it all on there, because at least it's one place or something. But leaving that aside, Netflix can still, so they raise prices. Say it becomes $20 a month, right? And then they have maybe they max out at 80 million households or something like that. They can still keep making money. But what does that mean for the stock market if they're not growing? Because of course we need endless endless growth in our reports, so that investors will feel bullish and buy the stock. What about that?
Well, first, the assumption is they don't have any other revenue source. They can't add in advertisements. They can't create. Here's a simple thing for you. Netflix could immediately say, look, we're going to lower our price from, or not even lower. We're going to create two-tier pricing. And by the way, this is what I wish they would do on Facebook. And so we're going to have $25 a month with no advertisements, or you're going to pay $6 a month with advertisements. Mm-hmm. I think you would see a lot of people drop down to $6, and Netflix would make a lot more money. And so they don't have to get more subscribers to keep their stock price growing, as long as they get more creative with what they're doing. If they don't do this, then they become AT&T. They become something of a utility provider who is nothing but a cash cow. And then their valuation is, how much money can they return to stockholders? And the answer right now is not much, because they spend so much developing content. So, but I think they have a lot more tricks up their sleeve before they get there.
Interesting. I have, excuse me, I have the lower tier of Hulu with ads that comes with, it comes free with my Spotify subscription. And oh man, it's not enough, because it's free. So I'm taking it. It's sort of free anyway, it's a bundle, but oh, man, those ads are pretty insufferable, and it's the same ones over and over again. And they must be just trying to drive you nuts to the point where you're like, fine, I'll just pay for no ads, because I just can't take watching these anymore. So that could be a good strategy for Netflix, Rodney. All right, great. Rodney, you talked about this a little bit. You hinted at it. GM announced an all-new electric Hummer. And this thing is interesting because, Rodney, the Hummer was a symbol for maybe mid-2000s excess. It was a gas guzzler. It was very gaudy. I mean, you couldn't miss one driving down the road, particularly the orange or yellow ones. There are a lot of those around in my neck of the woods. But they're rebooting it, I guess, as an all-electric vehicle. And you wrote about this on informedamerican.com. Rodney, you referenced Tesla here. Now they're unveiling a Cybertruck, and now GM is getting into the business with this as well. But it comes with a very, very, very high price tag. It could be well over six figures to get your hands on this truck. But I have to say, and we could pull this up, it looks absolutely beautiful, and I cannot anywhere near afford this thing, but I want one.
Well, the Tesla pickup truck, I don't care for. It's that ugly Cybertruck, but it's going to be just under $50,000 a year. Whereas the GMC Hummer truck, the one you can actually put a reservation on for next year, is $112,000. And you look at it and think, it's a pickup truck, right? It goes 350 miles and it has the same lithium ion battery that these other vehicles do that takes many hours to recharge. And so it's not useful as a truck if you're doing anything in it. And so I don't know, but it does go 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. And so if you want to race Porsches out on your street, you can do that.
Who doesn't want to do that? It's like a big barge, beating a sports car. That's amazing.
They are introducing lower priced models, or that's their plan. In the years after that, each successive year is going to have a lower priced one available. But there's so many rivals. The Rivian truck is coming out. The Lordstown truck is coming out. And so I look at this and I think, General Motors, you're still not there. You're just not. And so I don't. To the point of what we talked about earlier, the idea that we're going to move to electric vehicles at such a pace as to dramatically reduce our oil consumption, we're just not there in any big numbers. Tesla announced earnings and they made a profit for like the 5th straight quarter or whatever it was. And everybody was just joyful about that. It's like, wait a second. They've earned about $450 million, I think, over the past 4 or 5, 6 quarters. But they've also earned $1.3 billion in tax credits by selling zero emission credits to other manufacturers. All of their profits came from selling tax credits. They came from me and you as taxpayers. They did not come from the company selling profitable vehicles. And so we're not anywhere close to this going mainstream. And even if they got to 500,000 vehicles, which I don't think they will, and even if they got to 500,000 in the US, which they will not, it would still be just a very small piece of the 16 million vehicles we sell every year. So we're not there yet.
If Joe Biden gets elected, then we're gonna get rid of combustible engines. We'll all buy the new GM truck for $100,000. And of course, who cares if Tesla's basically profiting from government money? Because that's sort of the Green New Deal anyway, right? We're going to invest in things, and we know what that means. So this is maybe that we're looking at a glimpse of the future here, Rodney.
There are some positives here, and so I don't want to take away from it. I mean, the truck is cool looking, right?
Yes, it's very cool.
There's a company, QuantumScape, that we've talked about before, that's made the solid state lithium battery that is cheaper than the current battery that people use, lithium ion, and gets 80% more power from the same weight, and can recharge in 15 minutes to 80%. And so that battery is supposed to be available by 2024 on a commercial level to put into cars. And so that sort of thing is transformational. That sort of thing is pretty cool. And that can lead toward what we want to have happen. But again, we're just not quite there yet. So.
Yeah. But isn't a truck like this, isn't a truck like this sort of aspirational in a sense that they can get something out there? I mean, I guess maybe this is the same argument as Tesla, right? It just takes time, but maybe, in other words, to scale down to a more reasonable consumer level. But maybe if anyone can do it, it's going to be a company like GM, and maybe that could be an opportunity.
I think it's aspirational for GM, if that's what you're saying. This is the same company that screwed up the Bolt and the Volt. And so I just look at it and they haven't been able to do either of two very clear things. One, make an electric vehicle that makes sense, even though they've had this model out there called Tesla since 2012, plunking out cars. Or two, go buy a stupid electric car company that already has the plans for it. Here's the comical situation General Motors finds themselves in. The company spends billions of dollars a year. They make millions of vehicles a year, and they closed their Lordstown plant, their auto assembly plant in Lordstown, Ohio. They closed it and then turned around and sold it to Workhorse, which is making electric trucks in their plant. Here's a question. Why didn't you just buy Workhorse? And so I can't explain it. I have for a decade been beating on General Motors. The stock price is $37. It's gone up dramatically in the past several months. Guess what? They went back public again in 2011 at $34, $34. And so they've earned a whopping 10% over a decade when the rest of the market was zooming to the moon. And this is after giving away all their debts and me and you paying for their pensions. And so it's they just haven't been able to get out of their own way. And of course, they stopped producing most sedans. So
okay, so
I can't explain it.
GM maybe not the opportunity here to lead the way in electric vehicles. So we will see. Now, Rodney, you mentioned about suggesting that maybe this giant behemoth of a motor company gobble up a smaller company that actually can do something like that can help them get going in electric vehicles. Now, this does segue very nicely into this Department of Justice antitrust case against Google. They're sort of alleging the same thing, and some other things going on about basically dominating search and holding a monopoly. They have the Android operating system, YouTube, and a bunch of other stuff. They are a monster. So the government is going after them. And there's another thing here about Google paying Apple $12 billion to make its search engine the default search engine on all Apple phones. And I believe they also have a similar deal with Samsung. Now, Ronnie, Google stock went up after this. Is that an indication that this thing is going nowhere? And are we not going to see, say, the breakup of Google?
I think the stock went up because it's so hard to prove the harm. Is Google a monopoly? Well, of course it is, right? I mean, when you log on to search for something, unless you make a concerted effort to go to Bing or DuckDuckGo or something, you're going to Google, and those search engines drop down to Google for much of what they do anyway.
Yeah.
And so, but who's being harmed? Who's got the standing? Most times when you have a monopoly, when we think of a monopoly, it's people who are providers who get together to make a concerted effort to keep prices inflated so that they earn more. And so this is a monopsony, if that's the word you want to look at. I mean, it's technically correct in that it is a concerted effort by people who control the market to push the price down like Amazon does. And so Google's price is free. Now, you and I both know that if something is free to you, you are the product, right? What they're doing is selling you as a potential consumer to all these advertisers. And you may hate that idea, but it doesn't cost you anything in the terms we commonly think about, which are dollars and cents. There's an externality cost, but so it's going to be really hard for the government to prove an incredible harm to the individual. And that's what they're going to have to do. Other than saying, Google, we just hate your guts, they're going to have to prove something that will be better if they break them up. And that's hard to do because the monopoly over the search engine allows them to have all of this information flow very nicely in one place. And so they're going to be able to show, yes, we actually bring consumers this nice flow of information like they want. And if you broke us up, maybe that wouldn't happen as well. Now, of course, on the backside, you and I can say, well, they don't show you the things they don't want. Well, that's true. But so I think that's why the stock went up, is people are going to say, show me the harm. And that's going to be hard.
Yeah, I think the government is going to have to make maybe a new kind of argument. I think maybe, that's the challenge. Now, I'm thinking of something like, here's the problem. They become basically a gatekeeper of information.
Absolutely.
And that has a cost. I don't have dollars to it, but that's a societal cost.
Well, and that becomes the problem. You can't put a dollars and cents estimate on that one. And so we can talk about it all day long, but we can't put that thumb on it and say, that's it. It's X number of dollars per person over Y years equals Z cost. And that's the struggle. And that's why I think it's going to fail or be much less than it is today. Now, could they come out and say, hey, look, you're just too big. You're going to have to separate off the mobile system over here. So, if you're doing cell phone stuff, that's going to be Android, and that's going to be separate from Google. And this is going to be the search engine, and that's going to be YouTube, and literally break it apart. Frankly, just because you're too big. This can be done. All you need is a court that says, yeah, I think so too.
I think that's a good thing.
But that's not easy.
It's not easy, but I think it's a good thing. I think it would be nice to see. I'm thinking of YouTube. Google gobbled up YouTube. They didn't create it. It was just another company that was coming up, and they bought it, and it radically changed. And then how the two work together with the videos you see, it's the biggest video platform in the world and the biggest search platform in the world. I mean, you could see how this could be a problem, particularly as, the old days of YouTube. They wanted to make it a creator space and all that, which it still is, but it's a very different landscape, and it's not YouTube anymore. It's Google's tube now.
That's a lie too, by the way. There was no intention of it being this creative kumbaya space for people to go make whatever they want and bring digitization to the masses. This was creating a digital platform where people could upload video of anything they wanted, hoping to capture enough eyeballs on a consistent basis to where you could turn around and sell it. Because don't forget, YouTube lost money. YouTube made nothing. And so what Google bought was a losing proposition. And what they did was turn around and monetize it. That's why you see the little ads and everything now. And so there are a lot of things in the tech world that operate at a loss because somebody sees them attracting a client base that eventually can be monetized.
Well, yeah.
And again, it makes you and me the product at the end.
Exactly. Well, it starts off as we're free, open. It's the Wild West. Come do what you want. And then, that way they suck up a user base, get market dominance, and then they close it off.
So it starts off with, I'm going to sell you this bill of goods talking about how wonderful and open and free everything is. And I'm willing to lose money for a while we do it, because at the end, I need to make money off of you. I think we just described the entire election process we talked about at the beginning, where you're told a bunch of cool things before you cast your vote. And afterwards, maybe it doesn't work out that way.
I agree, Rodney. Rodney, it's nice. It's nice to agree with you for once, because normally we seem to find ourselves on opposite ends of takes. So good to see. So I say take the hatchet to this monstrosity. All right, Rodney, final thing, story here from InformedAmerican.com. And really my main question is that I'm going to detail why. Are Americans disengaging from the culture at large? And one example here you have written in Informed American: we're ignoring baseball. World Series has lowest viewership in history. Just 9.2 million viewers to watch Game 1 between the Dodgers and the Tampa Bay Rays. But it's not just a baseball problem. We saw this with the NBA. I haven't seen the latest NFL ratings over the last couple of weeks, but the opening weekend was not good. It was down as well. And it just seems also the first debate viewership was down there. We'll see what the numbers come up for the second debate. I'm getting the feeling, Rodney, that people are just kind of saying, I'd just rather just go into my Netflix, as we talked in earlier, and just watch that. What do you make of all this?
Well, I think there's a few things going on. The first is exactly what you just said. As we see more people cutting the cord to regular cable, regular television, and moving into streaming services, they're not seeing the ball game as they flip by on channels, because that you don't flip channels anymore. You know what you want to watch, or you're scrolling through pre-prepared content. And so you're just not coming across one of these sporting events like that because it's not on your television, right? It's not in your stream. And we're seeing a lot of young people do that. I mean, it's not a small percentage. And so that's going to cut your potential base of people, certainly from the days when you and I were, very young, when there were 3 stations. I mean, remember 3 back in the day, right? With ABC, NBC, and CBS.
Well, I grew up in the cable era. Let's not,
Well, okay. So I'm a little, so I started with just the 3. And so you were going to watch the World Series, dagnabbit,
right.
Because And part of it was, this wasn't a monopoly, but it felt that way because the other stations were going to put on trash because they knew that most people were going to tune into the World Series. So they weren't going to put anything good opposite it. And so you were given a choice between the sporting event and some piece of junk programming you never wanted to watch anyway. And so that era has changed. And there has been some politicization of sports as we've seen them take on some social ideas and put a lot of that out front, and that turns off a lot of viewers. And certainly the screwed up season this year. Do you even know when the games are being played? And a lot of players are not able to play for different reasons. And so it's just like the season that will be lost to time because, you're never sure the winners were the best teams because perhaps other teams were under the weather for a couple of weeks or whatever. And so the jumbled mess just kind of puts it all together. I don't buy into the thing that it's strictly because they're pushing these social justice ideas. That's the only reason, but I think it's part of it. I think people get a little discouraged. They're like, wow, I wanted to tune into the game so I could tune out of reality, and you're not giving me that choice anymore.
Is it possible that people are just kind of tired of everything that's out there?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I think that's it. And sports gave you a way to get away from that.
Okay.
Sports were never pure. I'm not going there. I'm saying that they gave you an opportunity to identify with a team for your local team, right? The Tampa Bay Rays are in the World Series, and it gave you a chance to identify with that, hometown team. But if you're then shown all these other messages along with that whether you agree with them or not, they're making us tired because it is really kind of dragging on the nation, then perhaps you're not as interested in watching.
Yeah, we all have a choice, and I can make my choice not to watch and just to go instead and watch, whatever other movie that's out there or something. Who knows? Yeah,
right. And let's not discount video games. I am a fan of video games. I don't play video games, but I recognize that online games have some really interesting features, and one of them is community. And while it might seem unusual if you don't play them, video games give people in different locations the opportunity to get online and talk to each other while they play. Yeah. And so it's giving people a platform to be social during the pandemic that they don't have. I mean, because you're not meeting out at a bar, most people, you're not going to these different events in person. And so people are taking on more of these video games, playing more, and meeting up with their friends, family, whatever online. And you know what? Maybe you're not watching the game. Maybe you're online playing Destiny or something.
Yeah, you don't have to. You don't like this broader culture. You can sort of remove yourself from it and go into a subculture where a place that you like. And yeah, that makes
sense. With 3 or 4 of your friends while you do it. I mean, it really is a meeting place for people who like each other. It's not what it's often portrayed as in the news. With people around the world saying horrible things to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Rodney, final thing here, because I have to mention it because I'm a Dolphins fan, and I know you wrote this in part 2 because you are an Alabama fan. You wrote about Tua Tagovailoa being named the starter to replace Ryan Fitzpatrick. I'm excited about the move. We drafted the kid at number 5. We were last season, if you remember, the team was accused of tanking in order to get Tua. We got him anyway, despite picking at number 5. So I'm excited. He's only thrown 2 passes, but 2 completions, Rodney. So that you don't get any better than that.
He should retire.
He's done. So you watched him a bit at Alabama, and he suffered that horrific injury to end his career there.
Well, I mean, he will forever be known as the young man who came in and replaced Jalen Hurts in the championship game when the team was behind, and then brought him back and threw a 60-yard pass in overtime for the win. I mean, it was absolutely off the hook, off the chain, and so it was pretty awesome. But I liked I liked the Dolphins, not Tampa Bay, not because of Tua, although I'm interested in seeing how he plays. I happen to be a Ryan Fitzpatrick fan. Yeah. I mean, you just never know where he's going to show up. I think he's played at every team in, both leagues. and you just, even when you don't know where he's going to show up, you don't know which Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to show up. He's either going to throw 450 yards and, 6 touchdowns, or he's going to throw 5 interceptions, or possibly both. I mean, he is the Wild West in a one-man show, and he's an interesting character at 36 years old, having played quarterback at Harvard, and just seems to be a happy guy. And he was as cheerful as everybody else when he was replaced with Tua at the end of the last game. So I'm happy for him and happy for the other.
Sorry, he said he was when he got the news, he did say he was a little heartbroken just because he loves the game, but he's showing support for Tua just because he wants to play, and he's so fun to watch. I mean, he goes out there and throws his body out there with reckless abandon. He's a character, as you said. He went to Harvard. He's got a whole brood full of kids. I mean, this guy has lived a great life so far. I mean, he looks like a leprechaun with the red hair and the beard and everything. And so
you mentioned that story too
of him. Some of his antics, press conference antics, right?
I'm sorry?
You have that story of some of his press conference.
Yeah, when he wore, I think, Deshaun Jackson's warm-up suit and jewelry into a press conference, and Deshaun Jackson comes out from the side and says, "Can I have my clothes back?" I think it was last year. And Ryan Fitzpatrick is just, he's stone-faced through this. And there he is, right? And so when Deshaun Jackson came out during the press conference and said, "Can I have my clothes back?" Ryan Fitzpatrick, I don't think, said anything. And one of the reporters asked him if anything he had on was his. And he said, the chest hair, which was, it was delivered, just deadpan. It was great. And so funny guy all around.
That's hilarious. Now, he has actually been playing well this season, but as you mentioned, the bad's coming. So maybe they pulled the plug at the right time.
Exactly. Let him leave on a high note. And, next year, will he still be here? I don't know. He'll be 37. He probably has 1 or 2 more years, certainly as a backup, because he knows the game and he learns schemes so quickly. That, not to take anything away from him, actually to give him more praise, the reason he moves around so much, I would imagine, is because he's very good at learning new schemes to play, because that's the kind of experienced quarterback you want behind your first and second guy. Those people have years. This guy has minutes, and you may need him to fill in, at a moment's notice, but you don't want somebody who can't pick up your game and kind of go with it quickly. So if you in Tampa Bay, you probably remember Vinny Testaverde at 40 years old coming into play for a season because he could learn the schemes and do the work. And so that's probably who Fitzpatrick is.
Yeah, he's probably just a great guy to have in the locker room, I assume, for leadership and just camaraderie. So
it's great talking to you. Next week, we do have, of course, GDP coming in the economy. That's going to be reported. And then, of course, it's going to be the countdown to the election. And that's going to be the entire conversation, sucking all the oxygen out of the room. So I will see you next week. Thank you, Dave.
You've been listening to Get Informed, America, brought to you by the Informed American Radio Network. Please like and subscribe today in order to get new exclusive weekly episodes. Any questions, thoughts, or comments can be sent directly to info@informedamerican.com. And don't forget to visit informedamerican.com to keep up with real, smart news. Until next time, fight fake news and find common ground.